My name is Lou Brown. I was born in a house on top of the hill of Congress. I was in the Navy for 5 years, and when we got married, we lived in St. Louis for a while, but we moved back out and built a house on the Gray Summit Road. It's now tore down. I went to St. Bridget's grade school, Pacific High School. I rode the public school bus to St. Bridget's, which is can't do nowadays. Went to work at McDonnell Aircraft for $1.05 an hour and drove back and forth from Pacific. But gas was 15.9 cents a gallon. Like I said, I spent 5 years in the Navy. Come back and met my wife Joann. We got married in 1956. Had 5 daughters. They all went to St. Bridget's. And they've scattered all over the world. There's nobody here yet. They got one in Wisconsin, one in North Carolina, one in Georgia, one down in the Boot Heel, and one in Australia. They did. And the youngest one's going to be 52 this year, so you know how long it's been. My dad's father had a grocery store in Pacific for a long time. If you're familiar with where the new bank is, where Pacific Foods was,
Yeah.
Laverne Myers lives in the White House, and the empty lot next to us where he had his general store. He started it back in about the 20s and fizzled all out after Kroger and all them came in. He just kept going downhill. I guess along about the 60s was whenever he finally quit. Well, he died in the 60s, so yeah. And his wife was a Smells, which there's a lot of them around here yet. They both buried in St. Bridget's Cemetery. My mother's dad immigrated from Germany in the 1850s, and when the Civil War started, he enlisted in Lee's Horse Cavalry in St. Louis, which got absorbed into the 5th Cavalry Cavalry, and he went through with Sherman to the March to the Sea. He got caught by the Confederates down there in Georgia and put in the famous Andersonville prison.
Wow.
He got in there in about the end of July, first part of August, and along about October, I figured with all the records I got, he got marched out to Charleston, South Carolina, or Savannah, and he ended up at the end of the war in Charleston, South Carolina. He came back to St. Louis and come out here and bought a farm up over on the other side of Merrimack Terrace from E.J. Roberts, with Robertsville and Roberts State Park and everything is named after. He married a lady that had just immigrated from Germany and moved out there. That was about 1870 he did that. And so he raised 10 kids on the farm. Anyway, the wife here, she worked at Pacific Foods and Kroger's here in Pacific for quite a few years. She knows, more than likely knows more people in Pacific right now than I do.
Okay, I'm Joann Brown, the wife of Lou, and when he was in the Navy, the 5th year that he was in the Navy, we lived in Hutchinson, Kansas. And I wouldn't trade that first year for all the tea in China, but I dropped him off at the base, and about 2 blocks there was the red lights behind me. I thought, what in the world did I do? And I was a nervous wreck. I had my Navy ID, I had my driver's license, and the patrolman got out of the car, and he says, ma'am, I don't have to look at your driver's license, right? But you're from the city of St. Louis, and in St. Louis, Missouri, and he said, in Hutchinson, Kansas, we make full stop signs, not running stop signs. Yes, sir, yes, sir. And so he followed me. Back then, there was only stop signs. He followed me for 3 months, and to this day, or three stop signs. To this day, if you're ever behind me and there's a stop sign, I count to 3 or 4. And you were talking about the floods. Back in, was it 82, that bad one was through here?
Yeah,
And
82 or 83. 93 too.
And anyway, from St. Bridget's was helping. Birthright was right in the same area, and it could be the same building that Norbert Gildehouse has. And we were taking baby clothes out of there to go and wash them because the flood waters was just coming up. And in St. Bridget's gym, there was no senior center, was where, because we were on this side of the flood, we had the soup kitchen and different things like that. So we've been pretty active in the town and everything.
I might mention that my high school class had 35 kids in it, 22 boys and 13 girls.
And when did you both meet?
In 56, 55, 55. I come back from overseas in 55.
Let's see what the deal was. His sister and I, we were seniors in high school. We went into the city. Some way, somehow, we met each other. And different, like Monsanto and General American insurance, no, we don't have the experience. And we happened to have an ad sheet that Butler Brothers, who supplied Ben Franklin's stores, wanted a file clerk. So we went over there and we both got the job. And because of me I was born up in Washington at the old St. Francis Hospital, I got reacquainted with some of my mother and dad's friends from there and everything. And so we just had a bond, and Mom and Dad enjoyed talking to my mother and dad and so on and so forth. So he came, and then there was going to be a big cousins get together, which I had already met a lot of them over the year and a half, 2 years. And he got off the plane on the 17th of December, and I had a date with him on the 19th. And
Like in Shanghai.
his dad said, well, come on, go in and ask Jo. She knows everybody. So we all, and to this day, we still have that first cousins get together.
Some of the stories that I can remember, which goes back a long ways, were the movie. We used to go to Tuesday night to a double feature for a dime. They always had a Western and then like Law and Hardy on the second one.
At the Royal Theater?
At the Royal Theater. I spent a lot of time out at the river. My dad used to own 50 acres as you come off the Old Bend Bridge. And as I was growing up, I spent a lot of time out there fishing and hunting. And yet today I do a lot of trapping. Some of her family history, they all come from Germany except the one bunch. One great-grandmother was from Switzerland. But they all settled around Washington and Japan, north of Sullivan up there at St. Holy Martyrs. In fact, there's a bunch of them in the cemetery up there. But they were, her Voss was her maiden name, so and their other grandparent was a Mitchell. And
Built our house right across the field from Mom and Dad. And there was many an evening in it that Mom and I walked that gravel. Our girls played kickball and everything else on that gravel because that time I was a stay-at-home mom after we got the house built and that stuff. And the kids on the block on the road, they all played out in the woods and stuff like that. But they played kickball and dodge, everything on the gravel. And they would be down in the woods, and we had this partly collie dog. She was a peach and a half, and she would go down with the kids and all of that, and I would whistle from the back porch, and she would stand up. She'd be laying down, and they said, "Your mother whistled," and I would give them a few minutes, and I'd whistle again, and Lady would turn around, and she's, she whistled Mrs. Brown whistled a second time, and Lady was walking up to the house, and that meant, kids, it's time to go home. Girls, it's time for supper.
my dad had a very good bird dog, pointer, back in the 40s. And he had a couple brother-in-laws who loved to bird hunt, so I told you where we lived there in that wooded area right there. We would leave there, go up Gray Summit Road, all the way up to where Bill Devine. There's a house up there right now that used to be the wool gases. It doesn't have any running water or anything, and it just sits there. But when we get up there, then we'd cross over. There'd be nothing. There are no houses or anything. We'd cross over and come back down, almost to Highway Inn, and then go out through the orchard, which is Orchard Estates now, almost all the way to the river. Cross over, come back down to back where the industrial area is, back through where Hawthorne is, down to the foot of the hill, and that'd be a morning's hunt.
Same way
And
with
we'd jump
Westwood.
5, 6 covey of quail maybe doing that. You don't even hear a quail anymore. They let me tail along. I didn't get to do any shooting, but I got to walk along with them.
I was born at the old St. Francis Hospital, and if you know where the doctor buildings are up there, that's the old St. Francis Hospital.
Minus a couple layers.
Yeah, minus a couple layers. And my mother and dad, after they got married at Holy Martyrs in J-Pan, Missouri, they lived in Washington. And then my aunt, my dad's sister, lived in South St. Louis and called up and said, Fred, they need machinists down at Seltzer Brothers on Second and Sydney. It's probably gone by now. And Daddy went down on a Thursday, the beginning of the war. Went down. I was a first grader at Borgia, and Daddy went down that Thursday morning. Come back that evening. We packed up. He met with the landlord, and we moved out. And he started working on a Monday, and so that's why we wound up in South St. Louis.
St. Bridget's, when I went there, we went to school in the convent building, they call it now. There
There
was 2 rooms. They had one nun had 1st through the 4th, and the second nun had the 5th through the 8th. Had the big church. Our playground was actually the town dump almost. I don't know whether you realize that parking lot up there used to be a huge hole in there. Everybody threw stuff in it. And you know, one of the little things that guys do when they're in school, accidentally on purpose, a ball would go down in there at the end of recess, and we'd have to climb down in there and get it. Now that thing seemed huge to me now, but it couldn't have taken up but about maybe half of that parking lot, because they had parking space in back of the old church, which if you know where the set of steps come up off the street, that went straight up into the old church.
Yeah.
Well, none of this, that school building, none of that was there. That was our playground, really. Then the dump was on the side of it. I see your floods down there, too. First one I remember was 1945. And I remember that very well because I was a kid on a bicycle riding in the water. And I got too close to the edge of the street and went into a ditch and got good and wet. Yeah. And then the one in 15 and the one in 17, when we moved into the Hawthorne subdivision, we're in the back end of it. And the river got into the backyard just a little bit. But what happened was it come in the sewer, in the basement. Man, we had a mess down there. We're down there, we plugged up the toilet, took it off and plugged it up, and plugged up the sewer, but we couldn't do anything with the bathtub. It come up in the bathtub.
And this
And we're
was
sitting down there with 5-gallon buckets, so we'd go over to the sump pump and put it in. But all it did was get the rugs all wet. We had to replace them, but it didn't bother anything. We kept it from going any deeper.
But I don't know how much Clorox I used to wash, and it was all over with. I mean, I thought, oh my gosh.
When I got laid off from McDonald in the early 70s, her brother Don had the Hogan Dairy here. And I drove a milk truck on him for 5 years. I went wholesale. I liked that going. I really enjoyed that job. Yeah.
No.
I worked for him back in high school days in the summer one time. I'd work for him over there in the dairy. Back where BP is now, that's where their dairy was, right in there.
RJ.
Payne Street was just a 2-lane gravel with grass growing in the middle of it. There was only the Huffman farm on there. And one other house, I can't think of what their name is now. There's a couple old maids lived in there, but I can't think of it.
Oh.
But anyway, then Don Hogan and Dave Wells each built a house on it, and it just progressed from there. And then there's another thing maybe you haven't ever been told. There used to be a local train that run back and forth to St. Louis. It'd leave here early in the morning and pick up at Eureka and Allington and all the way in. It'd come back out in the evening. And it'd run up the railroad tracks to about where Payne Street is right now. And then they had a Y. They had a system goes back around there. And where the administration building sits right now, that was a deep cut in there where it backed up that way. It'd come up and it'd back up into that cut, and then it'd go back in and be ready to go back to St. Louis in the morning.
We took his grandpa Brown, down to Furman Deloche, and we were going to go and pick him back up again, and he wasn't there. Stubborn German. He went on, as we called it, the plug.
He got down to Union Station, he come out on the train, that's the first thing we knew where he was at. He was home already.
My dad, when they still lived in Washington, he would drive a Fisher Trucking Company, and it was when I-44, it was just 66, he would come by way of Old Gray Summit Road and make it,
That was 460, 66 even existed.
and he
That was one of the routes down here.
and he says, I never thought that one of my kids would be living on this road.
I'll tell you one thing maybe that would be interesting. When I was a teenager, we had one policeman. He drove his own car. His name was Clark Belger, if everybody ever says. That was the only one.
Osage Dental used to be a Parrett's restaurant. The best hamburgers in town.
I ate a lot of hamburgers there. Hamburger deluxe with tomato, lettuce, and everything on it. French fries and a drink for 35 cents. But everything was good there.
Everything. I mean, their hamburgers were good. The French fries were good. The whole ball of wax.
Yeah, it was a good place. And they did a good business too when 66 was the main thoroughfare through there, you know.
And I have to change the subject a little bit, but I loved working for Kroger's and Pacific Foods. I loved it. Different ones see me now and say, well, do you miss it? I said, I miss the customers, but I don't miss the responsibility because I was in charge of the front end and cash and sales.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
I
full
love
plate.
my job. And plus working, well, we both were very active working at St. Bridget's. And that stuff. I mean, in all categories.